Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Tuesday topic. Today's topic is meaning well isn't always doing well. Hi, Sherry. Hi, Michelle. Um, and our presenter today is Maurice Cottman, who is the director of the Student Center of Multicultural Programming at Drexel University. While we're waiting for everybody's microphones to turn on, or while we're waiting for a few more folks to join us, let me just plug a couple of upcoming Tuesday topics. Next week, we have Ethically Speaking, Infusing Responsible Conduct of Research Across the College, which is going to be an important thing. If you're a researcher, come join us so we can get your RCR responsibilities taken care of. And then following that, another session from the Board of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, Making It Happen, Growth and Sustainability for Nursing and Health Professions, Professors of Color in an Academic Environment. All right, and without further ado, I'm going to throw it over to Maurice. Maurice, take it away.
Thank you, thank you. So first things first, I want you all to know that there will be no slideshow. It's the end of the term. I get it. So for me, I was thinking, what can I do to make this more interesting, but also so that we can have a real conversation. So if we choose to not have a conversation, it'll be me talking to myself, which I do way too often anyway. So at any point, feel free to give your opinions, whether it be in the chat or unmute yourself if you feel comfortable. But before I dive too deep into it, we're going to start my session off with a song, because music is how I articulate my emotions and my feelings. And this session, I thought about it and I was like, what could I possibly play to articulate how it feels to be somebody in society who might be viewed as other, a minority, somebody who might feel like they're minoritized, and a lot of things might happen within communities and societies. So I figured I would pick one of the most important artists of our generation, Jermaine Cole, AKA J. Cole. So let me share my screen. Okay, we're about to watch J. Cole performing on Letterman, and then after it, I'm gonna ask you, how do you feel about the performance and the things that he was saying?
Hey. And I'm in denial, and it don't take no X-ray to see right through my smile. Oh no, I'll be on the go, but it ain't no drink out there that can numb my soul. Oh no, all we want to do is take the chains off. All we want to do is break the chains off, yeah. All we want to do is be free. All we want to do is be free. All we want to do is take the chains off. All we want to do is break the chains off, yeah. All we want to do is be free. All we want to do is... Can you tell me why? Every time I step outside, I see my people die. Oh, I'm letting you know that it ain't no gun they make that can kill my soul. Oh no. All we want to do is take the chains off. All we want to do is break the chains off, yeah. All we want to do is be free. All we want to do is be free. All we want to do is take the chains off. All we want to do is break the chains off, yeah. All we want to do is be free. All we want to do is be free. Forget this chain, cause this ain't me. Though I'm eternally grateful to Jay-Z. We're so elated, we celebrated like Obama waited until his last day in office to tell the nation brothers is getting their reparations, hey. A man can dream, can he? No disrespect in terms of change, I haven't seen any. Maybe he had good intentions, but was stifled by the system and was sad to learn he actually couldn't bring any. That's what I get for thinking this world is fair. They let a brother steer the ship and never told him that the ship was sinking. But I got other think about, like my bank account. Forget that watch, you paid too much for it. You ought to be ashamed. When brothers back home be dreaded when the seasons change. Cause they ain't got no heat and they ain't got no AC. Walmart distribution fired my homie, he just had a baby. You wonder why it's been so many B&Es lately. While brothers from the hood shooting like this is TNT lately. And since all the ballers leaving college early, I turn on the TV and don't see no brothers with degrees lately. Are we all alone, fighting on our own? Please give me a chance. I don't wanna dance. Something's got me down. I will stand my ground. Don't just stand around. Don't just stand around. All we want to do is be free. All we want to do is be free. All we want to do is take the chains off.
So yes, that was J. Cole, aka one of the most important artists of our generation. Initial thoughts.
Got a pit in my stomach.
Michelle, tell me why. Why is there a pit in your stomach?
Well, the idea of, taking the chains off and just how there are just so many systems that are in place that still have to be dismantled. There's just so many obstacles. And, that's, I think, where the pit is coming from, that there's still so much to do.
Thank you for that. Anybody else have any initial reactions?
I can go. Definitely just very, very frustrated at how relevant it still is, because that performance was years ago. I remember when I first watched it, so watching it again is just kind of like, it's tiring.
Yeah, I believe that performance was like 2014, 2015. So, history repeats itself. Any other initial thoughts?
I think it's very relatable for me, being a person of color and also a Black man, because when you said all we want to do is be free, it definitely hit home, especially with everything going on in today's society.
Yeah, and the idea of freedom is a privilege that not everybody's afforded, just like security. Any other initial thoughts? Anything at all?
It had me thinking about how the industry of like television and media in particular will elevate Black artists on their platforms to talk about these issues, but then doesn't provide any material support. And so it made me think about the concept of like allyship versus being an accomplice, and how David Letterman providing J. Cole the platform is allyship, but it's not being an accomplice, because there's an ulterior motive of ratings, especially of what was occurring politically during that time. And it made me think about the Grammys this past year, all the Black artists singing about police brutality at the Grammys, and then just the very empty diversity statement given by the Grammys at the end with no material support for that emotional labor. So it was just kind of making me think about the context of that performance as a platform.
Yeah, amazing points, Vaughn, and everything that everybody said so far is why I chose to not only show that video and that song, but why I chose to not make a slideshow. Because honestly, I'm exhausted. That's just quite frank what it is. I'm exhausted by the rigors of life. I'm exhausted by having these constant conversations, even though I'm the person who chooses to hold the conversations because of how heavy they actually are and how much it actually takes to lift them up. I'm exhausted by the police incident that happened outside of my window literally 1 week ago, right here on campus. And if you don't know what happened with that, there was an obviously emotionally disturbed Black man outside. And eventually Drexel PD came, even though allegedly Drexel Public Safety was the ones called. And it took about 6 to 8 different officers to tackle him and restrain him And I watched it for 15 minutes before they came and while they were there. And within 15 minutes, I had to leave and go do something else, and they were still there. And I watched all of that, and it left a feeling in my stomach that didn't sit well, because by the letter of the law, they probably did what they were supposed to do, but it still didn't feel right. So what I did was I took pictures and videos of the incident, and I sent them to different people who I work with right here in Rush, including my own boss. And I said, this is why we need an intervention specialist, because Drexel PD probably meant well, but I don't think they did well, even though they probably did what they are allegedly supposed to do. And that's why when I was coming up with this concept and putting this together, I was like, no, we're going to have a group conversation. We're going to have, as they say, a family conversation here at Drexel, because I think that often we make statements and we think our statements is the answer, or we think our statements are the way in which we're going to resolve a situation, when the only thing our statements really do is acknowledge that there is a situation happening. You know, I like to say that, are we really doing the work behind the scenes the same way in which we talk about the work in front of people? Is it just an optics thing? Or is it something that we really are looking for success and failure? And I think here at Drexel, something that I wrestle with all of the time is my moral compass is a lot different, I think, than a lot of people who I come in contact with, because there's very little about our jobs that says we have to be moral in a certain way, because it's all up to the eye of the beholder. So even though here at Drexel, for instance, we follow the letter of our laws, we say we have to do this and we have to do that, but everything else becomes a lot more subjective. That's why when I say meaning well doesn't always mean doing well, it's because I can't say what your heart really is, but I can see what your actions are and how they're affecting me. Similar to how I watched those police officers tackle that man and hold him down for 15 minutes, including stepping on him to restrain him, physically stepping on him to restrain him and things like that. And I was like, they probably meant well, but they didn't do well. And that kind of brings me to this part of the conversation. I would love to throw it out to each one of you. This idea of the actions and the power of words. So speaking about matters is a form of action, but it's not always the final form. In your personal opinions, what does acknowledging a problem truly do? Remember, if you don't talk, I'll talk to myself, and that's going to be kind of awkward for everybody.
I think acknowledging. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Tian.
I think acknowledging an issue, what it does depends on, one, how it's acknowledged, and in what space is it acknowledged. Because let's say, for example, our university, Drexel, as an entity, certain things may get acknowledged, but sometimes it's done in a way that's so vague it means nothing. So I think in that case, acknowledging an issue is just a way of kind of like checking a box or trying to, get people to like be quiet about something. And it doesn't mean anything. If you acknowledge something sincerely, like if you acknowledge, what's the facts of a situation, quote unquote, what's right and wrong about it, then you're getting into the correct awareness of an issue, I think. Because a lot of people think that just talking about something, it's like, oh, we're bringing awareness to it, we're addressing the situation. But if you didn't really say anything, then you didn't even really do that. So I think bringing awareness is where those conversations come in. And then if you do it in the correct way, I think then you're allowing yourself to reach out to the people who are being affected by it, which in the grand scheme of things, we're all affected by everything, but the people that are directly impacted, and you're showing that you care and that you're there for them. So if you do it in the right way, that's what it does. Acknowledgement and, solidarity. But if you don't do it right, then you've done nothing.
And to add on to that, T, when people acknowledge things too often, especially in today's climate, their guilt becomes the star of the show. And it's like, okay, this was supposed to be about this population of people or this group of people or these specific individuals. And now because you feel bad for sad individuals or emotions, everything, all the focus now goes to the guilt instead of actually what the true problems still are. Would anybody else like to add?
I'll add to that. I think as Tiana said, if it leads to awareness, if it leads to some kind of action that is going to give real sustainable change, then acknowledgement can be powerful. But if it's just a voice, or as you said, Maurice, a way to make the privileged person in that setup feel better, then I think it's meaningless.
Thank you, Kimberly. I agree. I completely agree. And far too often when those situations happen, the person who feels like they are being marginalized or that they're being attacked or that their identity is the one on the chopping block, they're left holding the bag to also educate the people who now feel guilty about what's going on, even though that wasn't necessarily the purpose of said meeting or acknowledgement. Would anybody else like to add anything?
Yes, I just want to piggyback on what Tiana said and Kim said. Yeah, just acknowledging it to me, if it's not sincere, it doesn't really mean much. And I've read Abraham's Kendi book, and what he was saying, he was giving examples of what an anti-racist is, a discrimination. But in his book, he really talked about policy and changes, and that's where the action comes in. But if you have leaders that may not believe that systemic racism exists or discrimination exists, then you ask yourself, where do you go from there? Um, what do you do?
Mhm.
Okay, because you're asking, you see what's happening in the world, as you said, as you watch what happened outside your window. We hear it on the news. We see so many different things, and you ask yourself, okay, we see, okay, they acknowledge some things, but when is the action is going to take place? What policies and what changes are we going to implement to make you believe that you really mean it?
Yeah, and something I like to tell people is that we're dealing with lives, not just legislation. And I think similar to what J. Cole said in the song about Obama in the last verse, where he was like, on the last day, if Obama would have gave his reparations, but we don't really see that much change. Maybe he really wanted to, and there were things that were blocking him and stopping him. And I think that action is something that it can be looked at multiple ways. And one thing that I want to bring up in this conversation and just keep people abreast to is that in the history, at least of our country in America, and the history of what we do as people in power, we typically give people the crumbs and pretend like we gave them a meal. Like we give people the scraps of the things we don't want. And then when we finally allow them to have a little bit of freedom, a little bit of privilege, a little bit of security, we say, look what you have. You should be happy for that. Like I used to get into fights with family members when they would say like how well they were doing because they had the basic necessities of life. And yes, I agree. Having good health is very important, especially today, and doing things like that and being able to talk to your family is very important. But when we look at the injustices that we face as Black and Brown people, when we look at the terror that's going on in our city, with the murder rate and nobody's really talking about it, to me, we got to demand more than what the scraps say. Often, at least I can speak for a Black person, we've been given the scraps throughout our entire existence. When we were in physical bondage, they gave us scraps from the table and we made soul food. When we were able to have our own areas, they said we couldn't eat and drink and go to different places. So we created Black wealth with Black Wall Street because we supported ourselves and put money back into ourselves. And then when they said we couldn't vote, we created civil rights movements. So we've always taken scraps and created full meals from them. But every time we figure out the recipe, it feels like, at least in this country, they change what the meal is supposed to be. Like every time we reach a high score, they change the game. And I think that we get stifled too often about the little things that we were able to accomplish, and we forget that there are bigger things at play. I like to say that the issues that we see in today's media and today's world are not new issues. They're just remixed. That's all they are, a remix. They're the same issues that have been around since before I was born, since before most of us here were born, or any of us here were born, whether it be in this country or other countries. But we tend to only focus on the scraps in our own lives because we have a certain privilege like that. We don't have to worry about what's happening around the world because we're here. We don't have to worry about what's happening on other campuses because we're at Drexel. But I think when we lose sight of that, like I like to say, Drexel is in the community of Philadelphia, but we're not of the community of Philadelphia. And if we're not even being good partners to the people who we live with, and we're not being good partners to each other, who we work with and who we go to school with, how are we ever supposed to look at the institution that we are in and feel like we're fully supported? And that action point that Denise said is very important. We got to stop pretending that just because we created panels or we created task force or we sent an email that the problem is actually solved, when in all actuality, all it is acknowledging it. Like there are certain things that I've been working on here over the last year with Drexel that I'm still waiting, honestly, to see what comes from it, even though everything I could possibly supply is there. Because acknowledging that there are gaps and acknowledging that there are issues too often is presented as the answer to the problem, but it really isn't. All it is just highlighting it, and we can't lose focus of it because we're really good at saying something like we're working on something and never giving timelines and never really coming back to it until everybody forgets it. So that was a very long-winded response from me. Would anybody else like to add to the conversation?
Yeah, that made me think about, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just say that just made me think about the way that oppressors and an oppressive structure like gaslights marginalized people specifically. And I think about there's like a micro example within the family that I think happens outside, like in a larger scale of like, you know, exactly what Maurice was just talking about of like the taking the less than the bare minimum and then through resilience creating structural change and then having people in power then say, well, at least you did this, why aren't you happy? And I think a lot of times it reminds me of like a model of like abusive families of being like, well, why are you upset? Like you have a roof over your head, your belly is full, like, why do you always have an attitude with me? It's very similar in that way of like, the like way that systemic oppression like constantly gaslights people, marginalized people, and particularly Black and Brown people, when they say like, this is not good enough. And it's like, well, 30 years ago, you couldn't do XYZ. And it's like, yeah, exactly. That was even worse. Like, what are you talking about? Like, and it's like, I think that that generational component is what perpetuates inaction because people feel like, oh, well, we passed one anti-racist policy, or, we put one anti-racism training in your career pathway, or we, sent, like Maurice was saying, at least we sent out an email. So like, what more do you want? Like, we're doing what you want. It's like, you're doing step 0.5 of what we asked for. So it perpetuates through that like generational cycle of gaslighting, I think.
No, I think that was really a keen awareness, and I want to thank you for sharing that, and I want to thank Maurice for engaging us and having this conversation. But I'm all the way back. I'm all the way back to the video with J. Cole, where he literally you talked about the word acknowledgement, and if people listen to what he was singing about, he said, "We just want the chains off." I'm paraphrasing. I really want the chains off. Did you hear what we're not asking for retaliation, right? I think Kimberly, help me out, Maurice, her last name, who talks about, burning down Target. Well, we don't own Target. We're not burning down grandmom's house, and we'll not, and you don't want us to ever own Target, right? So, people talking about how looters and everything, and because they're changing the narrative. Now you're focusing on someone who's burning down something, but he's singing about, we just want the chains off. And then we're going to go about our lives and developing ourselves and growing and so forth. But we're not talking about once they come off. Where does that fear come from a statement like that? Fear comes from that statement, right? Black lives matter. Well, all lives matter. No, I didn't say all lives don't matter. I said Black lives matter. Well, I don't understand what, because you're not listening. All we're saying is until Black lives matter, all lives can't matter. So we're not all, right? So, people, oh, well, then the hands go up, or people protect their core, right? Or they clutch their pearls, because they're trying to say, like, wait a minute, you're making me think about something I don't want to think about. And you're asking me to address something for which, why would I want to make a change? I'm good, right? So if you really think about the song that you played, 20 minutes ago or so, we just want the chains off, right? Not asking for anything else. So I think I like that part. But I know I'm taking you back 20 minutes, but I waited for everyone to kind of give their feedback. But I wanted to add that. And then I wanted to kind of graduate it up to where we are when people were talking about, well, when people were experiencing the verdict day, right? The verdict day. We all know what day that was, when Derek Chauvin and for George Floyd's murder. And then after the verdict, you could see all these collective shoulders, and all the exasperations coming out in terms of, all the breaths coming out. And then people saying, oh my gosh, you guys should be so thankful and grateful. And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, no. Like, I don't thank people. If I'm thankful, that means I'm addressing that power should stay where it is. And I'm not going to thank the oppressors. So thank you for doing what you should be doing in the first place. No. And then grateful, I am not grateful to any entity but God. So I'm not going to give you grace. I'm not going to be grateful to you. So people are like, oh my God, Veronica, you must be so thankful and so grateful. And I'm like, oh yeah, no. Yeah, no, those are two words that I couldn't use during that entire time frame. But everyone kept putting thankful and grateful and, and so excited. I'm so glad. And because it should have been obvious. It should not have been something for which there was a collective, waiting for, and guilty, and guilty, Now we have to wait, a couple more weeks to find out about the sentencing. It's going to be the same thing again. Everyone's going to be watching, where were you when, right? It's going to turn into, where were you when Martin Luther King, I'm old, was shot, right? I wasn't actually born, but, the theory of it, right? Where were you when, so that's going to turn into one of those experiences when it says, where were you when the verdict came down? And where were you when the sentencing came down? But if people were thinking that we should be thankful and grateful, then we haven't grown.
Dr. Carey coming in with the gospel per usual. And I agree with everything you were saying. Yes, hair flip moment. And before I throw it out to everybody else too, to continue the conversation, I just want to make a couple points based off some things that Dr. Carey said. And first one is, Black people specifically have never demanded what we should be demanding. Like what J. Cole said, just take the chains off and we'll figure it out. We're not even asking you to build up the things we're doing. We'll figure it out. Civil rights, they didn't say human. They didn't say equal. They didn't say equitable. Like, you just be civil. Can you just do certain things so that we don't get hung from trees, so that you don't burn down our businesses, so that you don't convict us for looking at white people like civil? We were talking about the bare minimum of those types of things. And another thing that I just want to put out into the space is that historically, even today, whenever Black people rise up, there is direct white opposition to anything that we're doing. So when Black Lives Matter came up, all lives matter, or blue lives matter, right? But think about this, and this, I didn't even realize this until a couple of weeks ago, and I was having a conversation with somebody, and have you realized that the other social movements that have come up in the country, there isn't a direct opposition to it? When people say stop Asian hate, there's nobody saying stop all hate, right? That shows you that it's ingrained, that it's deeply rooted, that the issues that we are facing are things that we don't even want to acknowledge. Because if we acknowledge it, then we have to be accountable for it. And if we're accountable, then we have to make change. But what we choose to do is say, look, they're being different. Look, they're segregating themselves. Look at what they're doing. When all actuality, if somebody was to say stop all hate, they would sound ridiculous, because you're like, everybody isn't being hated. And if you think they are, then you need to look a little bit deeper at the way in which people are being hated and prosecuted and persecuted. So we got to realize that even though we are realizing what the issues are allegedly, there are still layers, and there's silent and coded language. And we got to read between the lines sometimes, because it's easy to turn a conversation a different way to fit the narrative of the majority. But if we stop listening to the minority in that moment, then the mission, the vision, the purpose of the plan doesn't get executed. Anybody else want to add before we go into a different topic? Because Dr. Carey came with the gospel, so I felt like I needed to at least join her on the pulpit.
I definitely wanted to add. I had this in my mind from when Denise was talking, but Dr. Carey was definitely getting there. Um, and just that, like institutions, or like whatever you want to talk about, whatever's in power, when they even try to acknowledge a situation, it's like words only go so far, and this goes into the conversation about the action that needs to be done. When you can lay down policies and stuff all you want and say, oh, this is what we stand for, this is, don't do this and do this and blah 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 blah. But if your actions don't support that, then the culture that you're cultivating is not going to reflect what you're saying. And I think one of the biggest things that we see, especially in an institution like Drexel, is that they'll say that they condemn certain things, but then when it's done, the 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 repercussions are not there, or they're not equivalent to the quote unquote crime that's happened. And I think that's another important thing to look at, especially when we're talking about, um, like reviewing and holding accountable our police or our staffing here. And you hear so many stories of people getting away with so much. And that's what creates that distrust with the community.
What you're saying, Tiana, and what I've heard Dr. Carey say before is making me think about like how passive language is like adding to this, like the way in which, like I remember when like the murder of George Floyd, how people, or it was saying like he died, but like I remember doctors say he was murdered and he was killed. Like there's like when you use specific language, like the same way like with like Jackie Robinson, oh, he was like the first like Black baseball player, but who was stopping him and who was stopping other people from becoming baseball players? Like it's not like he just like magically became one in a vacuum. Like they're like are white people, like we are personally like stopping Black people from like living their lives, and we are murdering them. And it's just like this language is like getting rid of culpability, it's getting rid of responsibility, and it's just protecting like white fragility by like not taking the responsibility and not taking the action that would be required to like lift chains, like with like even the J. Cole song about lifting chains, like they have to be lifted, like it's not like I don't know. Yeah.
If I can add, going off of Shell's point there, um, I think one thing, and I'm like absorbing all of this, that's why I'm kind of speechless. But this idea of chains, it always makes me think in reading Ibram Kendi's work, but who put the chains there, and what what mindset or what conversation had to take place for them to be put there? Because yeah, we're in America, but this idea of the way Black people are treated globally is a bigger issue. Because yeah, some people landed here, but some people landed all over the world. And even though we're struggling here in this country and George Floyd may have been murdered in America, other people, especially those that other Black people and of course allies as well, were marching globally because the issue isn't just here. And for me, I learned about healthy human rights a couple of quarters ago, but this idea of like, what are our basic human rights and why can't that be the center of all of these conversations? How should you be treated as a human, period? Like, why is it? I'm glad Maurice brought up the point about, and Dr. Carey too, this like about face, I guess, whenever Black Lives Matter comes up or something with the Black community, a white response comes next. Well, why hasn't the anti-lynching bill been passed? Anybody can be lynched, but, of course, that's been more prevalent to Black people in history. But why isn't that at the forefront? That's a basic human right. I don't know what human right it is, but it's up there. Stuff like that. Like, that should be a part of the conversations that we're having, to me, with each other, to centralize that conversation. That's at the forefront. where did it all come from? What is the true beginning? Yes, we're dealing with the ramifications or the consequences of what began, and we got to figure it out, and we have to stop dealing with these low hanging fruit and get to the core and the root of it and hold each other accountable, black, white, or otherwise, because being othered, even if you're a minority, there is levels to that too. But that needs to be in the conversation, the beginning, to have it educate how we deal with our present and our future.
That brings me into a great transition point. But before I do that, I got to say we did not land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. Malcolm X's birthday is tomorrow. Just want to put that out there. And we don't live in the same America. I think that people have to realize that we live in at minimum two different Americas. And it is one of these things that I personally and deeply believe that you have to pick a side. Point blank, period. You can't say I'm in the middle. Can't say I'll wait this one out. You got to pick a side. We had a pivotal point in history where we are knowing the people who are not riding with us. I like to say that if you ride with me, you got to be in the front seat. That's what it's going to be. If you want to be an ally to me, that's something that you can't claim. It has to be earned. It has to be bestowed upon you. And I think that who we are is important. We got to know who we are, but we don't only have to know who we are. We have to know who we are in relation to other people. We have to isolate our own privileges and disadvantages in order to really be there for ourselves and for other people. I think that too often we keep everything so white and black, but as people, we are complex. There's a lot of gray areas there. But for me, of issues of morality, mortality, race, there are no gray issues when it comes to which side of the fence you're really going to stand on. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to be on the wrong side of history, we've seen this play out over and over and over again. This is a repeating narrative. Everybody who, at least in America, who looked like me, who fought for the certain liberties that we're talking about today and fought for action, for the most part, they didn't make it to 40 years old. They were killed. They were assassinated. They were brutalized. All for the right for us to even have a conversation and then build upon that conversation. But if we're constantly rebuilding the structure of the home, we can never actually erect it. And I think that when it comes to us doing things, that's where the real change comes from. We got to be active in our allyship. We can't be passive in it. You are not an ally to me because you posted a black square. I'm sorry. It's not how I look at life. What are you doing behind the scenes? Are you donating to causes you care about? Are you shopping at local mom and pop shops, black businesses? Are you on the front lines, or are you watching it from TV? Are you voting? Hopefully you all voted today if you're in the Philadelphia area. Are you doing the things that actually take real change to actually come forth? It's something that Vaughn said earlier about being an accomplice. Allyship at the highest level is an accomplice. That means whatever happens, it happens to both of us at the same time. I think that it's easy to stand next to somebody when it looks pretty. I think that's really easy. I think even in America, historically, they'll try to put people who are saying pretty much the same thing against each other, like they did with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. They did that on purpose because they looked at it like, which one of these specific people are the one that's less passive and that we possibly can get away with brutalizing? So they picked a guy who said he was more peaceful. And where Malcolm X said, somebody put a hand on you, you send them to the cemetery. I'm not saying that's how I look at life, but that's how people feel about not being able to be afforded life. So even though Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. were fighting for pretty much the same exact thing, history will say that they were enemies, even though they only met one time in their lives. But that's because we can fracture movements. We can fracture the things that we're trying to fight for and divide people. We need unity. It's not on the oppressed to actually lift up the oppressor. It's not what it's for. The chains have to be lifted off. We can't pick the lock ourselves because we didn't put them on ourselves. And that's something that we got to keep in mind. So when people throw these narratives out there that like, oh, well, why should we help? They can't help themselves. Challenge that. Question that. Question yourself. See what you are actually doing and be an active ally in the communities that you care about and care for. Because one of the greatest things that I ever learned in life is that if it's not going to be me, then it's going to be you. Oppression doesn't stop because a certain group of people is no longer around. It just transfers to the next person, the next group of people, the next community. If you want to really look deep into it, look at the history of America. Not all white people were considered white. And then after a certain period of time, White people were more integrated, so they started focusing on different people of different ethnicities and different colors, and that's how we continue the cycle. It's not that that oppression and that disrespect and that hate and that racism didn't end, it didn't leave. It just transferred into the next host. That's what it is. It's a sickness. It just transfers into the next host because we have not put our minds together, put our spirits together, and put our money together to actually figure out what the cure is. Instead, what we do is we give you medicine and hopefully it doesn't kill you later on. That's kind of how we treat it. We treat racism like the common cold. We know it still exists, but we know, if the symptoms are a little bit lower, you can live with it. We got to eradicate it. Because if we don't, our students won't believe in us. They won't trust us. Our staff will keep flip-flopping and leaving. I've worked with about 30 different people in my 3.5 years here who are no longer at this institution in the same capacity they were when I met them or at this institution at all. And a lot of those people were the people who we should still have here in order to help with this journey and this fight that Drexel is perpetrating. But I'm gonna throw this out to the room. How are you willing to be an active ally, not only to the communities in which you are in, but to other communities? And if you don't know, you can say that, and we can go over some ways in which to do so.
Maurice, this is Sherry. Hi. I also want to thank you for holding this space for this discussion. And I don't know if I'm directly answering your question or responding directly to it, but I, like Dr. Carey, I was going back to the song and in relation to acting as an ally and the lines that J. Cole said, we've been fighting on our own and don't just stand around. And that really landed for me as a white person and a white person with some seniority in this institution. And also echoing what I think Denise and others said about policy. And remembering way back to something Dr. Waite said in a seminar over a year ago, pre-pandemic, which is that policies are not race neutral. And that, our unpacking of the policies that guide our work here at Drexel, not only creating new policies, but looking at the policies that exist and unpacking them for how they impact the marginalized people or historically marginalized people in our community right here, is a kind of action that could make a difference, perhaps. And I think that that's a kind of action that's within our agency, within our capacity to really do. But I think we don't do that enough. I think we layer new policies on top, and the challenging of policies that that can hurt people or have implications, seem to me to be one of the examples of how meaning well isn't necessarily doing well. But that's a place in my mind.
I think you answered that question directly. I know you worried about it, but I think you did, because I like to call that the auditing system. Like, you're auditing yourself and letting J. Cole's lyrics hit you from a different way, and listening to them and letting them guide you a little bit. You're auditing like the policies here at Drexel and seeing if they're actually equitable, and you're willing to learn. And I think education is a critical component to actually being an active ally. So thank you, Sherry. You did answer that question. Would anybody else like to answer the question about being an active ally?
Hey guys. How are you, Maurice? Thank you for putting this together. I think educating yourself, active listening, and also I think speaking up is important. We have those conversations all the time about speaking up, and I think what for me, learning to each day speak up in a way that I'm heard. I think it's important how we deliver the message, because I was watching. I think it was CBS Today the other day, and I think the sister who's now in charge of Netflix, and she said, listen, folks label us the angry Black woman. And she said, you know what? I am an angry Black woman, absolutely. So there are times when I think it's important that people hear our voices and that we deliver that in a way that people understand what is being said. And it goes back to, if you see something, say something, and that's everywhere you are. It's in the workplace, it's within family, it's within other organizations. So for me, I think that's where I am now. But again, saying it in a way that I'm heard and understood. But then, Maurice, I also heard what you said earlier. And sometimes you're like, doggone it, I'm just tired. I'm tired of explaining and saying stuff all the time. So there's that too. So it's really about trying to, balance that. But at the same time, just still having the voice at the table all the time.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and in the words of one of my favorite people to ever walk this earth is Fannie Lou Hamer, sick and tired of being sick and tired. That's real. That's a real emotion that comes up often, especially in the Black community. But I love the fact about keeping your narrative alive, speaking when you feel is necessary, equitable, and means something to you. And I like to say that if you don't like the narrative of a conversation, then we got to change books. And I think that that's how I approach my life here at Drexel and even outside of Drexel. I speak up quite often, and I joke around about job security all the time, but I know I would rather lose for the right reasons than win for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of what Marcia said really spoke to me as someone who I consider myself like in the middle of marginalization, being a trans person, being biracial, being of Asian descent. I know so many people in my communities who weaponize their own marginality as an excuse to not speak up because they're like, well, I'm in danger for my own reasons. And something that I work very hard to do is when I know that my certain intersections of privilege will allow my voice to be heard over a Black colleague, I will use that voice, even though I am in danger as a trans person, right? Even though I am in danger as a Filipino person. Like, you have to, I think those middle marginalized groups of that like middle marginality, like we cannot be complicit in oppression just because we ourselves are not overtly privileged, because as like a white passing light skinned person, there are people who are going to hear my voice over somebody else's voice regardless of the fact that I'm trans. A lot of white liberals are LGBTQ allies, but they're still racist, right? So I think for me, that's something that's important to me in being an accomplice is like, if I notice that a Black or brown colleague of mine is being spoken over and their narrative's not being heard, like I will say something or I'll validate their point or I will bring it back and acknowledge that whoever is subverting that person is not in the right in that scenario. And I think that that's really important for people at other intersections to do. Um, so that's something that really resonated with me, what you were saying, Marcia, about like saying something in the right way. And also making sure that people's narratives have integrity and that they're being held accountable for their behavior as the other marginalized person in the room. Like I still have a responsibility.
Yeah.
I was thinking from I'm sorry, go ahead,
No, go ahead.
Are you sure? Okay, I'll
Yeah.
make sure I popcorn right to you. I don't want to center whiteness. I just want to say very quickly, as a white person, I see my work as calling out other white people, especially in Drexel, that's a predominantly white institution. And I'm working really hard to do that with professional staff and faculty because the burdening and the emotional tax has to stop for my Black and brown colleagues. So for me, that's what I see what my role is to try to pull whiteness off center when it's wants the spotlight, and also to call it out and name it and try to engage white people in self-reflection and acknowledging white as a race. We're not this like neutral thing and everything else is different. We are a racialized identity and we have to unpack that. And there's a lot of work to be done. So I'm going to pass to Tiana.
Yeah, very similar to what you were saying and what Vaughn was saying. I think when you're talking about allyship and what it means to really be an active ally, it really comes down to a lot of empathy and understanding, who you are and what your struggles have been, and knowing, what you would want someone to do for you if you were in that situation. So I think recognizing the whole, we're not successful unless everyone's successful, when it comes to, marginalized movements is very true. So that goes to what Vaughn was saying about, marginalized people that kind of, have passes in certain other areas. Um, it's important to recognize that and be critical of yourself, I think, and recognize where you failed, or, recognize when you've done something wrong and really listen to the people that you're trying to help, is going to be the best thing that you can ever do.
I appreciate that, Tiana, and that's something that I really actively try to do and stumble a lot, but I think that's really important, just really understanding where I cause harm, where I indirectly, directly cover over, misconstrue, avoid, duck and cover, and I'm working there.
I think another thing to because I'm gonna go.
Go ahead. I'll go after you.
Oh, okay, okay. I'll popcorn to you. Yeah, I think another thing is, I agree with everything that's been said. Just one more thing to add is knowing that in speaking up and being an ally, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy to challenge the rhetoric or the norm, but to know that it is weathering the storm per se. So one thing I try to do is when I see, or in this new space that I'm in, when I see people that have said before, like, I want to be an ally, I want to be able to speak up and, do this, I'll come behind them and support what they're saying in spaces that will try to minimize their voice or, skip over them. I think that's important because, as we know, when you're in spaces and somebody tries to dull you down or dim your light, that is helpful to have someone kind of affirm what you're saying. It gives you confidence. So the next time you might be somewhere by yourself, you're more able to, okay, no, you're not going to minimize me. Like, I am going to continue to speak out and continue to push what I'm saying. So I think that's important too, because it's not easy. Yeah, it's not easy at all. Okay, Miss Denise, your turn.
Okay, Patrice. This is a piggyback on what you were saying and so many others, but I might go back to what Dr. Carey said about and back to J. Cole. All we want to do is take our chains off. All we want to do is be free. And that is, I don't know, thinking about what everybody was saying, and I went back to that because it's not really asking much when you think about it. It really isn't. But going all the way back, as we said, this over and over again. And when I heard the song, it just brought me back to John Lewis, the George Pettis Bridge, the march. It took me all the way back there. And I'm like, wow, Dr. Martin Luther King. And here it is, 2021. And what I've been doing as far as being allyship is just educate myself, trying to educate people of all color to really take a look at themselves and reflect. Again, just showing empathy, respect, but trying to get them to understand this has been happening for so many years. And I'm like, I talk to my children, talk to young people since 2021. Sometimes I want to scream and just holler, like, and I don't use profanity, but I really want to just say, is this stuff going to stop? And the kids look at me, if I do, they look at, oh, mom, you used the curse word. But I'm like, when is this going to stop? This is 2021. And I had the conversation, I'm no longer going to be complicit, because to be complicit is silence. I did that for many years, and I've watched things happen, and I said, wow, I just sat there and I think because for my age group, we were afraid. We're afraid of the retaliation, the punishment, because you still see it happening even today. But I said, what can I do? Um, and now it's just time to speak up. Sometimes it's not going to be nice, it's not going to be pretty. But I'm going back to what Marcia said, just having a discussion and, you know, trying to understand and be careful with your words. But at another time, just be for real. Just be you and say what's on your mind. You don't have to hurt anybody's feelings, but if you do, if it came to the point, you still gonna have a discussion and you still can talk about things. But if you never say anything about it, one of the things I've learned, if you're not a part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So I speak up and I'm going to continue to do so. I'm going to learn as much as I can, and I'm going to try to educate myself and educate people. And the good thing I did, I voted 7 o'clock this morning. Yes.
And Denise, even if I hurt your feelings sometime, then I think what was the congresswoman said, maybe I must have hit a nerve. And so perhaps I hit a nerve. And so you need to go back and think about that because, you know, so as I always say, and then there's that. So I'm also reading The Warmth of Other Suns, The Great Migration. And it's a phenomenal book. And it takes you on a great journey emotionally, as well as educating yourself. And then when I look at, like Denise, you said, you know, when I thought about J. Cole and the part about when they take the chains off, and when you look at Blacks who came from the South in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, and you look at what's happening now, it just gives you so much pause when you think about how folks are still being treated. And it really does. It makes you angry and it makes you emotional and it makes you sometimes speak up come what may. You know, it just it takes you on so many it's a phenomenally written book. I love to read, don't get a chance to. So this book has taken me a short forever, but it is absolutely worth the journey.
Thank you all. And for time's sake, I'm going to close it out with this final thing. So I'm going to give you 5 quick tips to not only stay active, but to also keep yourself challenged. Very first thing, remember this conversation that we had today. Rewatch the video, listen to it just via audio. Listen to this conversation, remember this conversation, especially in times where it feels like there is no way up. Because the amount of things that were said today, and realize this is the Drexel community here. You have students here, you have administrators here, you have people who teach here, you have people who have multiple degrees or 1 degree. There's a lot of diversity in this room. And think about all the things that were said. 2, stay educated. You have to stay educated. And when I say stay educated, I don't mean just focus on the people who agree with you. Also focus on the opposition. You have to listen, you have to read, you have to watch what the other side of the point is too, so that not only can you be sure about how you feel and what you believe, but you can also try to figure out how the other side is coming to the table. That's how we do debates in this world, at least that's how they're supposed to. Now I just feel like people just scream, but that's how we really stay educated so that we can really clarify what those points really are. Third thing is, know who your allies are. Know who they are and lean into them as much as they can possibly take. Because we have to know our lines. Even as allies, we can't do everything and we can't be everything for everybody. So you have to know where your line is. Number 4, know who aren't your allies. You know, as they say, the people who smile in your face all the time want to take your place. You got to know who your allies aren't. Because often we put our pressure, we put our love, we put our heart, we put our mind and emotions into people or places that don't deserve them. And then we're left holding the bag again and being broken. So if you can't understand who your allies aren't, more than likely we're giving too much energy and too much focus into areas and places that don't really deserve our time and effort. And then the 5th one, actually, I'm gonna give you 6. Number 5, hold the people around you accountable. That includes the institution that we all are at. That includes our friends who say dumb things. That includes a family member who we think are too old to change. We got to hold everybody accountable because if we don't, then we're also complicit in it. One of the things about me that my boss would tell you is that I say no more than most people who work here because if I don't believe in something, I refuse to back it. And even when we're supposed to do something, I'm like, nah, I'd rather get in trouble and not do it than to do it just to say I did it. So holding people accountable. And number 6, bonus point, 6 man off the bench. Make sure you get some good music in your life, because good music can solve problems that you didn't know existed.
Yes.
Thank you. And I'm going to throw it back to the host of said event. Thank you again, everybody who allowed me to be here. Thank you all for coming out today. Appreciate you.
Round of applause again for Maurice
Awesome.
Cottman. And the crowd goes wild. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny because I was going to say, see, Maurice, are you a Leo? No.
I'm a Virgo.
Sorry.
I don't know what that
Sorry.
means.
But you and I think about the same moment, the same thing. And I'm like, you know what? I think the next thing we're going to have you come and do in 2022, maybe, or latter 2021 is the music. We should find like pieces of, things that speak to you. And when you said something earlier, I'm just so excited that I now watch Instagram Reels. I'm just saying. So it's been a moment for me. Yeah, I get preoccupied, a little bit obsessed. So I like the one where he says, you see her, you see me. When you see me, you see her. We need to get there, right? It's like then it's like period, right? You see me, you see her. You see her, you see me. Period. End of story. We're not there yet. We're somewhere between you see her, yeah, but how come you're not looking at? It's like, no, you already messed up. You already messed up. So hopefully we can get there. But I would love to have one where we do the music, where we can take different pieces and people can bring some, expression that way. So again, thank you so much. It's always enlightening. I know we always grow in these conversations, and we're glad you didn't have a PowerPoint. We've got to see you the entire time. So this is wonderful. And thank you for everyone for attending. Our Board of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion loves to bring topics and ideas to conversations like this one. I'll also put a plug in that you should have gotten an email today, or maybe you'll be getting it. I think it came out already, that we're starting our membership drive. So depending on your role here at CNHP, there are seats available. So please look into the membership drive. And then you too can plan events like this one today. A number of our members are here today on the screen, and each one of them has a different focus for how we can grow within CNHP. So thank you for everyone who was here today. And Darren, did you have something? You're to my left, Darren. So is there anything else you want to add?
No, that's all. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week and maybe the week after.
All right.
More Tuesday topics to come.